How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network, and we welcome you to our NCAA Week 4 recap show here, Season 4, the 2019 season. Of course, we took on Penn State in Week 4, a huge ranked matchup. It was number 9 Penn State versus number 15 Pitt. Your Pitt Panthers fell 34-32 in triple overtime. We had a 6-3 lead at halftime. It was tied 6-6 going into the fourth quarter. We ended up tying the game late to send it to overtime on the final play, kicked a field goal. Both teams actually kicked a field goal in the final minute. And then Penn State ended up beating us in triple overtime when they were able to convert a 2-point conversion after we were not able to do so in the same overtime period. It was one of the best games we've ever had in this career mode. It was a ton of fun. I can think of off the top of my head some great games that we've had in the past. I mean, in terms of like comebacks and crazy things, Pickett's first game when we almost came back against Texas and A&M, our comeback last year against Miami when we came from 25 down to come back and win in overtime. We had the Penn State overtime game that we won last year. We also had the triple overtime game. I think the only other triple overtime game we've ever had was Florida State in Season 1 when we lost to them in triple overtime on a Nate Peterman fumble in the third overtime. Any other overtime game, I'm pretty sure we've won single or double overtime. Just triple overtime just doesn't seem to be our forte. But it was a great game overall. It was a ton of fun. Kenny Pickett had an unbelievable game, 378 passing yards. Jay Keys had a game for the ages for a freshman, 11 catches, 165 yards, and a touchdown. He was incredible. Really, really great game. Paris Ford got an interception, so we finally got to see a turnover through the air, which was great for us. Really just solid game. Tommy Stevens, though, for Penn State played fantastic. Really won the game for them. And it's just a tough loss. It definitely doesn't hurt our chances of winning the ACC. If we win out and Penn State has a good year, I don't think it really hurts us as far as the national championship conversation goes for the college football playoff. We got into the college football playoff last year with one loss, and it was arguably a worse loss than what this one would be if Penn State still has a good season, because we only lost by 2 points in triple overtime as opposed to we lost to Louisville last season, Lamar Jackson, by 11 at home. This was 2 points triple overtime on the road to a top 10 school. So it's not the worst thing to ever happen to us. It's some good adversity. Hopefully we'll be able to bounce back. The only thing that's a shame for our defense is our yards against per game and our points against per game look so much worse now because we gave up 18 points in overtime as opposed to, 18 points in overtime, right? As opposed to, the fact we'd only give up 16 points at the end of regulation. So it kind of skews the stats a little bit, but it was a fantastic game and one that we'll have to bounce back from coming into this week. But around the rest of the ACC, Virginia Tech won their Virginia rivalry game with Old Dominion. Georgia Tech won their Georgia rivalry game with Georgia State. That was probably much tighter than they would have anticipated. Duke with a win over an FCS school to go to 2-1. Virginia, huge upset, big game by former Pitt target. We weren't able to sign him, but 5-star running back from New York, Ken Huffman, had a big game, as did Bryce Perkins at quarterback for Virginia. Their transfer quarterback came in, had a great game. Miami knocked off Louisville, so Miami's undefeated. They'll probably be into the rankings, top 25 this week. Wake Forest wins a shootout with Marshall, 52-42. That'd be a fun one. Arkansas State blows out Syracuse, who is just horrific. North Carolina beats ECU 31-16 in a Carolina battle. Boston College, big win over Boise State 27-24. And Notre Dame 38-21. The Irish blow out Clemson at home in Death Valley. Kelly Bryant unable to get the job done for the Tigers. And we look in the top 25. Ohio State, easy win over Central Michigan. Houston, a win. Ohio finally gets on the board as they took on another tough opponent, SMU. They finally won. LSU blows out Vandy. Georgia over Mississippi State. Bama over Buffalo. Michigan goes down to Purdue. So amazingly enough, those tight games for Michigan, they had won every single game they'd played so far by 3 points. They finally lose one. That was to Purdue. Florida blows out Tennessee, so a huge win for the Gators there. That should put them back in the rankings. Washington barely wins. Oklahoma with a win over TCU in a tough game. Stanford gets back to winning ways. Notre Dame over Clemson, like we mentioned. Middle Tennessee State just escapes an upset to UTSA, and then UCLA blows out Colorado to go to 4-0, though I believe their starting quarterback got hurt in this one, so we'll have to see. I don't think he'll be available at least for next week, let alone any further than that. Players of the week, Dwayne Johnson, 2 picks and forced a fumble for UConn. DJ Pearson, huge game for Arkansas State. Almost 400 yards and 6 touchdowns in a victory over Syracuse. I thought we might get an ACC Player of the Week nominee for either Keyshawn Camp on defense or Kenny Pickett at quarterback, but Kendall Hinton of Wake Forest gets it with a 400-yard performance, and Jordan Mack from Virginia gets it, although he had a pretty similar stat line to Keyshawn Camp, who actually had 3 tackles for a loss and a sack, so, it is what it is. Rankings-wise, Penn State with their victory over us jumps up to 7. Notre Dame with their victory over Clemson jumps up from 11 to 6. So they're the 2 biggest movers in the top 10. Clemson drops all the way down to number 9 with their loss, of course, to Notre Dame. We're going to drop down from 15 to 18. You can see there it says in the last week's section. So a little bit of a drop for us. Tennessee dropped out of the top 10 as well. They dropped to number 15 with their loss to Florida, who goes from unranked all the way up to number 19. So a huge movement for them with that big victory. Florida State dropped down. No, they weren't ranked. They lost to Florida State, I believe, was ranked, and then they fall out of the rankings. Miami comes into the rankings. I think they're going to come in at like 23. Basically, all the teams below 21 are brand new to the rankings. NC State jumps up a bit, and then it's Miami's new after their victory over Louisville. USF's new. They're 3-0, and Arkansas is 4-0 now. Their victory over Kentucky. They go in at number 25. You can see, Florida State dropped out from 20. Louisville dropped out from 21. SMU from 22. And Michigan's out all the way from 18. They're not even receiving votes anymore after that loss to a not great Purdue squad. So with those results, we'll see what we're looking at here in Week 5. Duke's taking on Ball State, and then a ton of ACC games finally getting underway. Virginia Tech taking on Syracuse. You got Florida State and Wake Forest, Clemson and Virginia, NC State, Georgia Tech, Miami and Boston College. So a lot of big ACC games finally getting underway. We'll see how the conference slate is really going to start to shake out with some of these big matchups. I mean, you got a couple of tough games. Clemson with their loss, they're going to take on a Virginia squad that's looked very, very good. So that should be an interesting one. Some big games around the country. Iowa State, who's undefeated right now, taking on number 11 Texas. Herb Street likes Texas in that one. Tennessee looking to bounce back from their loss to Florida, taking on undefeated number 10 Auburn. In Auburn, Herb Street likes the home team in that one, even though Tennessee has a better rated squad. USF into the rankings now in 3-0. They're taking on Navy. Herb Street likes USF at home in Tampa on that one. Georgia Tech, NC State, so now we'll look at a couple of big ACC games taken on. Number 22, NC State versus undefeated Georgia Tech. NC State the better team, but Herb Street going with the home squad yet again in Georgia Tech. Clemson at Virginia. Herb Street does like Clemson as they invade Charlottesville, but I think it'll be a closer game than a lot of people are anticipating with how Virginia's looked so far this year. Georgia against Arkansas State, big non-conference game because Arkansas State's a team that, to be honest, if they weren't playing Georgia and they had a little bit of an easier non-conference, I think they could run the table, but we like Georgia in that one. Penn State away at Northwestern, who's actually been pretty good so far this season. They've been impressive, but we'll see if Penn State can keep up their ability in this one. Ohio State taking on Wisconsin. Big test for the Buckeyes away from home as the Badgers and Alex Hornibrook look to pull the upset alert, as does Ole Miss. A+ rated. They've actually been pretty good after having a really bad year last year. I think they were 3-9. They're 2-1 already, and they're taking on Bama at home. Looking for that upset in the game of the week. And for us, we're taking on UCF. Much improved is UCF. I think they finished last year 7-6, so they weren't a bad squad. I think they were 7-5 and then lost their bowl game, if I remember correctly. So 7-6 they finished last year, but they're very good this year. Their offense is great. They're passing the ball very well. Their defense has been solid. Their turnover differential right now is fantastic, +5, which is number 4 in the country. But it's going to be a real test. Our defense, has been much improved, so it's going to be a good test for our defense to go against an aerial attack that UCF has put up this year. And that aerial attack, interestingly enough, is led by our former quarterback, in Ben DiNucci. We'll look at their stats here in a second, but for us, Pickett's been great so far. We haven't done much rushing the ball. We need to get that running attack going a little bit here at home. We'll see if we can do that. And our number one receiver, Jay Keys, 18 catches through 3 games already for the true freshman who was recruited as a quarterback, and he's making a real mark as a receiver here so far, but always recruited as an athlete as a quarterback right now, but looks like he may have a future as a receiver for us. Ben DiNucci, you can see 730 yards passing, 7 touchdowns against just 1 interception in 3 games for UCF so far as they are undefeated. His leading receiver, Dedrick Snelson, almost 400 yards already. So he's got a favorite target clearly there. And if you look at UCF's team as a whole, Central Florida, they're pretty overall solid. I think B+ is what their rating is overall. They don't have a ton of superstars. You see they only have 1 player that's 90 or better, and he's right there at 90, their starting center. But they have a lot of good, talented players. You can see a lot of their high-rated players are in their secondary, and they're on the offensive side of the ball. They're pretty well-rounded, though. You can see they don't have a ton of high-rated players, but they have a lot of guys with 80 or better. So they don't have a ton of weaknesses on this squad. You see, we look at DiNucci. We know what he can do because of the transfer with the editor that I did to move him and keep him as the exact same player. He doesn't show his stats from when he was at Pitt, but you know what he did when he was here with the Panthers. He was a good game manager. UCF seems like they've opened the playbook a little bit for him so far, and he's done a nice job. So we know what he can bring to the table. He can be mobile. He's got a little bit of quickness. We just have to force him to pass. He doesn't have the best arm in the world, so if we can force him to pass, we should do well. They do have some good running back depth. I think they have 3 runners of 86 or better, so we'll definitely need to try and shut down that running game. We want to force DiNucci to beat us with his arm. I think that's the way that we'll win. Take away Dedrick Snelson. I think beyond him, I don't think Bargnair is playing in the game. I think he is going to be out, so they don't have a ton of big receivers. They have Darius Bell, who does have good speed as their number 2, but then beyond that, they don't have a lot of receiver depth or tight end depth. And so I think that means if we can get Dane Jackson or DeMar Hamlin just draped on Dedrick Snelson the entire game, and we can even bracket cover him, keep our safety to that side of the field wherever he's at, I think that's going to speak well for us. They do have a very good interior of their line. Their 2 guards and centers are all 88 or better, so that's a very good section of the line. But our best linemen, Patrick Jones, Sean Wolfgang, we know what they can do on the edges, and they should be able to feast on those couple of weak tackles. So I'm expecting some good edge pressure and hopefully a couple of sacks, at least in this game. We only finished with, I think, 2 against Penn State, so I'd like to see more from our defense in this game if we can. And same thing, when we look at their ends, when we look at their defensive tackles, they usually have 1 or 2 good players, and then beyond that, they don't have a ton of depth that really intimidates us. So I think it's a game that if we just play our game, if we use Pickett like we can, manage the game, short passes, short to intermediate routes that continually pick up 7, 8, 10 yards at a clip, and then we can get the running game going a little bit. We'll try and get Sibley and CJ London going with the ball a little bit, maybe even put Jay Keys into the backfield if we need to as an option. If we can do that, I think we have a good chance of winning in this game. Interesting fact, though, Jay Keys' cousin, Trey Keys, from Newport Richey, Florida, is a redshirt sophomore free safety for this team. He's a good player. We'll definitely see him on the field. Should be a fun little matchup to see Jay go against his cousin, Trey. So that should be a fun one to actually get to interact with and see them both on the field. And I mean, who knows? They could be lined up against each other since he is in the secondary, and Jay will more than likely be a receiver for us for this entire contest. With Aaron Matthews out for the season with his injury, he fractured a vertebrae. Jay Keys is going to be a starting receiver for us with the way he's played so far. So he's going to have a ton of opportunity to prove himself as a receiver. So as always, guys, let me know in the comments, coming off of that loss to Penn State, do you think we'll bounce back and come up with a victory? What do you think the final score will be for us against UCF? I have the line at Pitt favored by about 4.5. But let me know in the comments what you think the final score will be, if you think we'll come away with a victory. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.